Note 2. A few words concerning the Kasidah itself. Our Haji begins with a Misa and scene and takes leave of the caravan setting out for Mecca. He sees the wolf's tail, Dum-e-Gurg, the Greek like Kauges, or wolf gleam, the Diluculum, the zodiacal dawn light, the first faint brushes of white radiating from below the eastern horizon. It is accompanied by the morning breath, Dam-e-Subh, the current of air, almost imperceptible except by the increase of cold, which the Muslim physiologists suppose to be the early prayer offered by nature to the first cause. Langul-e-Biaban, desert demon, is evidently the personification of man's fears of the dangers that surrounding travel in the wilds, the world where none save He, Allah, can dwell, is a great and terrible wilderness, Dasht-e-la-Siwa-hu, and Allah's holy hill is Arafat, near Mecca, which the caravan reaches after passing through Medina. The first section ends with a sore lament that the meetings of this world take place upon the highway of separation, and the original also has, the chill of sorrow numbs my thought, methinks I hear the passing knell, as dies across yon thin blue line the tinkling of the camel bell. The next section quotes the various aspects under which life appeared to the wise and foolish teachers of humanity. First comes Hafiz, whose well-known lines are quoted, beginning with Shab-e-Tariq, O Bin-e-Mauj, etc. Horror is the plural of Ahwar, in full Ahwar al-Ain, a maid whose eyes are intensely white, where they should be white, and black elsewhere. Hence, Arsili Haris follows. Umar-e-Qiyam, who spiritualized Tasawwuf, or Sufism, even as the Sufis, Gnostics, spiritualize Muslim Puritanism. The verses alluded to are from 60 of Mr. Fitzgerald's translation. You know, my friend, with what a brave carouse I made a second marriage in my house, divorced old barren reason from my bed, and took the daughter of the vine to spouse. Here wine is used in its mystic sense of entranced love for the soul of souls. Omar was hated and feared because he spoke boldly when his brethren, the Sufis, dealt in innuendos. A third quotation has been trained into a likeness of the hymn of life, despite the commonplace of the Navranta Vulgarite, which characterize the pseudo-Schiller Anglo-American school. The same has been done to the words of Isa, Jesus, for the author, who is well read in the Evangel, evidently intended the allusion. Mansur el-Hallaj, the cotton cleaner, was stoned for crudely uttering the pantheistic dogma. Anal haq, I am the truth, i.e. God. Walaysa fi jibati il Allah. Within my coat is not but God. Well, God being within and without everything, but not being it's, it's quite, panentheism is perhaps what he was mistaken as. The everything is God, which is, His blood traced on the ground, the first quoted sentence. Lastly, there's a quotation from Sardanapalus, the son of Anchiaraxes. Here, the Greek paixi may mean sport, but the context determines the kind of sport intended. A Zahid is a literal believer in the letter of the law, opposed to the Sufi who believes in its spirit. Hence, the former is called a Zahiri outsider, and the latter a Batini. So, you know, the Zahiriya, the Batiniya, and the Wataniya would be the ethnic. Moses is quoted because he ignored future rewards and punishments. As regard to two eternities, Persian and Arab metaphysicians split eternity, i.e. the negation of time, into two halves, azal, beginninglessness, abad, endlessness, both being mere words, the gathering of letters with a subject of significance. In English, we use eternal, veternus, age-long, lifelong, as loosely as applied to the three distinctive ideas: the habitual, popular parlance, the exempt from duration, and the everlasting, which embraces all duration, omniscience maker. It's the old Roman skeptics, homo ficit deus. The next section is one long wail over the contradictions, its mysteries, the dark ends, infinite sorrowfulness of all existence, and the arcanum of grief, which Luther said underlies all life. As with Euripides, to live is to die is to live. HÂJî ABDû borrows the Hindu idea of the human body. It is a mansion, says Menu, with bones for its beams and rafters, with nerves and tendons for cords, with muscles and blood for cement, with skin for its outer covering, filled with no sweet perfume, but loaded with impurities, a mansion infested by age and sorrow, the seat of malady, harassed with pains and haunted with the quality of darkness, tamaguna. Yep, they got that right. Often it's mistranslated as ignorance. That's not quite the thing. And incapable of standing. The pot and the potter began with ancient Egyptians. Sitting as a potter at the wheel, Sniaf at Hila molds clay and gives the spirit of life to the nostrils of Osiris. Hence the genesistic breath. Then we meet him in the Vedas, the being by whom the fictile vase is formed, the clay out of which it is fabricated. We find him next in Jeremiah's "Arise and go down" at the potter's house. And lastly in Romans 9:20, hath not the potter power over the clay? No wonder that the first hand who molded the man mud is in a lieu commune in Eastern thought. The waste of agony is Buddhism, or Schopenhauerism, pure and simple. I've molded earth on earth upon Saint YEZDî's well-known rhymes from 1440 of the Common Era. A couple years ago was 1440 of the Sacred Era. Earth out of earth is wonderly roused. Earth out of earth hath get a dignity of noust. Earth upon earth hath set all his thoust. How that earth upon earth may be his browst, etc. The camel rider suggests Ossian. Yet a few years and the blast of the desert comes. The dromedary was chosen as death's vehicle by the Arabs, probably because it bears the Bedouin's corpse to the distant burial ground where he will lie among his kith and kin. The end of this section reminds us of how poor, how rich, how abject, how august, how complicate, how wonderful is man. The Haji now passes to the results of his long and anxious thoughts. I have purposely twisted his exordium into an echo of Milton, till old experience doth attain to something of prophetic strain. He boldly declares that there is no God, as man has created his creator. Here he is at one with modern thought. En general, les croyants font les dieux comme ils sont. Yux means, says J.J. Rousseau in his Confessions 1:6. Les bons le font, bon les macants. Le font macant, les vots niao, et belio ne voyant que enfer, parce qu'ils vadrot ent, damner toi le monde, des ams amantes et dausis, ne croyant guerre et lundes étonnements dont je ne reviens pas est de voir les bonnes vénérants en parler das son tellement pomme. Il y croit doubt de bon maïs, je espère qu'il mentoit alors car enfin, quoi verdict qu'on soit il faut bien mentir quel fois quand on est avec. Man depicts himself in his gods, says Schiller. Hence the Naturgott, the deity of all ancient peoples, and with which every system began. Allowed and approved actions distinctly immortal, often diabolical. Belief became moralized only when the conscience of the community, and with it, of the individual items, began aspiring to its golden age, perfection. Deus est a superlative, dont le positive est le homme, says Carl Vogt, meaning that the popular idea of a Newman is that of a magnified and non-natural man. A lot of, like reincarnation, a lot of stuff is attributed to what they called in the 1800s the savage philosopher. And the savage philosopher had ideas that weren't natural, but like second generational ideas like reincarnation and some other stuff, personifications and myths for those personifications of divine attributes. He then quotes his authorities. Buddha, whom the Catholic Church converted to Saint Josaphat, refused to recognize Ishwara, the deity, on account of the mystery of the cruelty of things. Schopenhauer, Miss Cobb's model pessimist, who at the humblest distance represents Buddha in the world of Western thought, found the vision of man's unhappiness, irrespective of his actions, so overpowering that he concluded the supreme will to be malevolent, heartless, cowardly, and arrogant. Confucius, the throneless king, more powerful than all kings, denied a personal deity. That Epicurean idea rules the China of the present day. God is great, but he lives too far off, says the Turanian Santals in Aryan India. And this is the general language of man in the Turanian East. HÂJÍ ABDû eventually holds that idolatry begins with the personal deity, and let us note that the latter is deliberately denied by the 39 articles. With him, God is a being without parts, personality, or passions. He professes a vague agnosticism and attributes popular faith to the fact that Timor ficit de us, every religion being without exception the child of fear and ignorance. Carl Vogt. He now speaks as the drawer of the wine, the ancient taverner, and old Magus, the patron of the Mugan or the Magians. All titles applied to the Sufi as opposed to the Zahid. His idols are the idola, illusions of Bacon, having their foundations in the very constitution of man, and therefore appropriately called fabula, that nature's common course is subject to various interpretations. May be easily proved Aristotle was as great a subverter as Alexander, but the quasi-prophetical Stagirite of the Dark Ages, who ruled the world till the end of the 13th century, became the twice execrable of Martin Luther, and was finally abolished by Galileo and Newton. Here I've excised 2 stanzas. The first is Theories for Truth, Fable for fact, system for science, vexed at thought. Life's one great lesson you despise, to know that all we know is not. This is, in fact, well, didst thou say, Athena's noblest son, the most we know is nothing can be known. The next is essence and substance, sequence, cause, beginning, ending, space, and time. These be the toys of manhood's mind, at once ridiculous and sublime. He is not the only one who so regards bothering space and time. A late definition of the infinitely great is that the idea arises from denying form to any figure of the infinitely small, from refusing magnitude to any figure, is a fair specimen of the dismal science, metaphysics. Another omitted stanza reads, how canst thou, phenomenon, pretend that noumenon to meet and span? Say which were easier probed and proved, absolute being or mortal man? Did I say phenomenon and noumenon? One would think that he had read Kant on the noble and the unknowable, or had heard the Yankee lady who could differentiate between the finite and the infinite. It is a commonplace of the age in the West as well as the East that science is confined to phenomena. It cannot reach the noumena, the things themselves. This is the scholastic realism, the residuum of a bad metaphysic, which deforms the system of Comte. With all its pretensions, it simply means that there are or can be conceived things in themselves, unrelated to thought, that we know them to exist, and at the same time we cannot know what they are. But who dares say cannot? Who can measure man's work when he shall be as superior to our present selves as we are to the caveman of past time? The chain of universe alludes to the Jain idea that the whole, consisting of intellectual as well as of natural principles, existed from all eternity, and that has been subject to endless revolutions, whose causes are the inherent powers of nature, intellectual as physical, without intervention of a deity. But the poet ridicules the non-human, i.e. the not ourselves, the negation of ourselves, and consequently a non-existence. Most Easterns confuse the contradictories in which one term stands for something and the other for nothing. Example, ourselves and our not selves. With the contraries, example, the rich and not rich equals poor, in which both terms express a something. So the positive, negative, infinite is not the complement of finite, but its negation. The Western man derides the process by making not horse the complementary entity of horse. The pilgrim ends with the favorite Sufi tenet that the six senses are the doors of all human knowledge, and that no form of man, incarnation of the deity, as people might call them, prophet, apostle, or sage, avatar, and other terms like sent ones, often like Jesus and stuff like this, got worshipped, but are who they call Krishna and, Balaram and, that various things. But it was the same as the sent one, the prophet, the apostle, the sage, has ever produced an idea not conceived within his brain by the sole operation of these vulgar material agents. Evidently, he is neither spiritualist nor idealist. Well, that denies the possibility of revelation and inspiration in the actual sense, rather than just a reference term to, Then he proceeds to show that man depicts himself in his God, and that God is the racial expression, a pedagogue on the Nile, an abstraction in India, an astrologer in Chaldea, where Abraham says Berossus, Josephus, and 1:7, 2 and 2:9, was skillful in the celestial science. He notes that Akrana Zaman, and this time of the Hubris and the working dial, Hormuz and Ahriman, he brands the God of the Hebrews with with pugnacity and cruelty. He has heard of the beautiful creations of Greek fancy, which, not attributing a moral nature to deity, included theology and physics, and which, like Professor Tyndall, seem to consider all matter everywhere alive. We have adopted a very different Unitarianism, theology with its one creator, pantheism with its one spirit's plastic stress, and science with its one energy. He is hard upon Christianity and its trinal God. I have not softened his expression, a riddle, although it may offend readers. You know, number. Numbers. I don't remember 666 or what was it? There is nothing more there's nothing more enigmatical to the Muslim mind than Christian Trinitarianism. All other objections they can get over, not this. Nor is he any lover of Islam, which, like Christianity, has its ascetic Hebraism and its Hellenistic hedonism, with the world of thought moving between these two extremes. Now, Islam denies this idea of praying all night or fasting every day and not getting married, that sort of thing. It doesn't engage in that sort of thing. The former, defined as predominant or exclusive care for the practice of right, is represented by Semitic and Arab influence, Quranic and Hadithic. The latter, the religion of humanity, a passion for life and light, a cultural intelligence, for art and poetry and science, it represents in Islam by the fondly and piously cherished memory of the old Gibber kings and heroes, beauties, bards and sages. Hence the mention of Zal and his son Rostam, of Cyrus, and the Jamshid, which may be translated either grail, cup, or mirror. It showed the whole world within its rim, and hence was called the Jahan Numa, the universe exposing. The contemptuous expressions about the diet of camel's milk and the meat of the susmar, our green lizard, are evidently quoted from Firdausi's famous lines beginning Arab be Jai Rasid Eskar. The Haji is severe upon those who make of the deity a Kwan-e-Jagma, a tray of plunder, as the Persians phrase it. He looks upon the shepherds as men who rob the sheep themselves to clothe. So Schopenhauer furiously shows how the English nation ought to treat that set of hypocrites, impostors, and money graspers, the clergy that annually devours £3.5 million. Well, I'm sure it's a lot more because there's probably in England clergy that make more than that a year. Well, individuals, that is. But maybe that's considered to be like 3.5 billion. I don't know what that translates into really. The Haji broadly asserts that there's no good and no evil in the absolute sense as man has made them. Here he is one with Pope, and in spite of pride and erring nature's spite, one truth is clear: whatever is right. Now, a tenth of the income, people trying to pay a tithe, yeah, I think back in the day, even the clergy would have absorbed an even larger percentage of the money out there. Although the money collected for the tithes would have had to go more towards the people back in those days, but still, it was obvious that the clergy, but still, clergy today tends to be better off than the people themselves. But in spite of pride and erring nature's spite, unfortunately, the converse is just as true. Whatever is wrong. Khizr, Khidr, the green man, is the Elijah who puzzled Milliman. He represents the Sufi, the Batini, while Moses, is the Zahid, the Zahiri, and the strange adventures of the twain invented by the Jews have been appropriated by the Muslimin. Well, not quite. You find that some of these, anyways, he derides the free will of man like Diderot. He detects the pantaloon in a prelate, a satire in a president, a pig in a priest, an ostrich in a minister, and a goose in a chief clerk. He holds to fortune the Greek tuxa of Alcman, which is the Greek eu namias te kai pi dus a delpha kai prama o ias u gather. Chance, the sister of order and trust, and the daughter of forethought. The Scandinavian spinners of fate were Erd, the was, the past. Verdandi, the becoming of present, and Skuld, the to be, our future. He alludes to Plato, who made the demi-ergos, create the worlds by the logos, the Hebrew dabar, our creative word, through the ions, the Greek Iones, Iones of the mystics were spiritual emanations from the Greek Aion, literally a wave of influx, an age, a period, or day, hence the Latin wavum, and the Welsh awen, the stream of inspiration falling upon a bard. Basilides, the Egypto-Christian, made the creator of all 7 ions, are Terramata fullnesses, from 2 of whom wisdom and power proceeded the 365 degrees of angels. All were subject to a prince of heaven called Abraxas, who was himself under guidance of the chief ion, wisdom. Others represent the first cause to have produced an ion, or pure intelligence, the first a second, and so forth till the 10th. This was material enough to affect HÂJΗ, which therefore assumed a spiritual form. Thus, 2 incompatibles combined in the scheme of creation. And we see what kind of happened with the Kabbalah later on. He denies the 3 ages of the Buddhists: the holy happy, the mixed with misery, and the miserable tinged with happiness, the present. The Zoroastrians had 4, each of 3,000 years. The first, Hormuzd, the good god, ruled alone. Then Ahriman, the bad god. Well, not Zarathustra didn't support the idea of there being a different god. Is that spent the main, the top archangel and the devil were the 2 spirits in the older interpretation, but in Zervanism, then Ahriman the bad began to rule subserviently. In the third, both ruled equally, and in the last, now current, Ahriman has gained the day. And let's remember when I bring up the Kabbalah, it's interesting that the Quran, certain patterns in the Quran or certain orders in the Quran came first, and then through that and some of these other influences, then we arrive at the Kabbalah that we know of. That's not saying Jewish mysticism wasn't occurring from the beginning, certain esotericisms and stuff like this, because certainly we see in the production and the changes in the text that some stuff was going on, but a lot of pseudo-epigraphical sort of things that we can prove weren't thousands of years old, like people say the Zohar and some stuff is. But anyways, the Zoroastrian, against the popular idea that man has caused the misery of this world, he cites the ages when the old red sandstone bred gigantic cannibal fishes, when the Ulites produced the mighty reptile tyrants of air, earth, and sea, and when the monsters of the Eocene and the Miocene period shook the ground with their ponderous tread, and the world of water is still a hideous scene of cruelty, carnage, and destruction. It declares conscious to be a geographical and chronological accident. Thus he answers the modern philosopher, whose soul was overwhelmed by the marvel and the awe of two things, the starry heaven above and the moral law within. He makes the latter sense a development of the gregarious and social instincts, and so travelers have observed that the moral is the last step in mental progress. His Moors are the savage Dankali and other Negroid tribes who offer a cup of milk with one hand and stab with the other, while the colonialists are far more known for that. Thank you very much. As much as they put cannibals and traitors and stuff in the mix, there's time, you know, it gets more common elsewhere. He translates literally the Indian word hathi, an elephant, the animal with the hath, hand or trunk. Finally, he alludes to the age of active volcanoes, the present, which is more temporary, the shifting of the pole, and the spectacle to be seen from Mushtari, or the planet Jupiter. Now, some of these things that have been preserved in Hindu myth, initially they thought, oh, well, some of this goes back 40,000 years. And we have certain things in between. And like the Rig Veda, some of the Puranas and stuff actually convey the right time period for stuff that happened millions of years ago. Now, is this passed on memory from ancient humanity in Asia? Or, I mean, some of it might have even came from other parts of the globe, but, you know, Homo erectus and stuff was around, so, yeah. Or does this prove spiritual revelation, spiritual inspiration? Now, does it say this is light beings speaking, or people directly communicating with God, or fire beings, or that doesn't prove the point, but still it's something. And Jupiter is an important thing. You know, go back to the demiurge idea, but the HÂJΗ again asks the old question, what is truth? And he answers himself after the fashion of the wise emperor of China. Truth hath not an unchanging name, a modern English writer says. I have been long convinced by the experience of my life as a pioneer of various heterodoxies, which are rapidly becoming orthodoxies, that nearly all truth is temperamental to us, are given in the affections and intuitions, and that the discussion and inquiry do little more than feed temperament. Our poet seems to mean that the perceptions, when they perceive truly, convey objective truth, which is universal, whereas the reflectives and the sentiments, the working of moral region, or the middle lobe of the phrenologist supplies only subjective truth, personal and individual. Thus, to one man, the axiom opes irritamenta malorum represents a distant fact, while another holds wealth to be an incentive for good. Evidently, both are right according to their lights. HÂJΗ ABDû cites Plato and Aristotle. As usual with Eastern songsters who delight in mantic logic, here he appears to mean that a false preposition is as real a preposition as one that is true. Faith moves mountains, and manet imata fides are evidently quotations. He derives the teaching of the First Council of the Vatican, 5. All the faithful are little children listening to the voice of St. Peter, who is the prince of the apostles. He glances at the fancy of certain modern physicists. Devotion is a definite molecular change in the convulsion of gray pulp. He notices with contumely the riddle of which Milton speaks so glibly, where the dialoguists reasoned high of providence for knowledge, will, and fate, fixed fate, free will, foreknowledge, absolute, in opposition to the orthodox Muslim tenets, which make man's soul his principle, his percipient ego, an entity, a unity. The Sufi considers it a fancy opposed to the body, which is in fact at most a state of things, not a thing, a consensus of faculties whereof our frames are but the phenomena. A lot of things can be misunderstood in translation. So orthodox means correctly believing. And I'm sure maybe he means the indirect people, the conservatives. I don't think he means the fundamentalists, because that was even rarer back then. The people thought, well, we can follow the Quran for ourselves, and it was less common amongst people who called themselves Muslim. Nowadays, we're more global in our aspect, and that kind of forces us to say maybe we can't just pick up the nearest book of interpretations of these things, but we can look at these things for ourselves. And we can hear them plain for ourselves. We don't have to, we hear them outside the house of worship. So whoever's interpreting them, we hear multiple things. But they're probably talking about the nafs. So the nafs, the animal soul is, it's part of our identity, but it's not, so cement an identity, and it's not the main thing we should identify with. The spirit is more. But anyways, this is not contrary to the genetistic legend. The Hebrew Ruach, an Arabic Ruh, now perverted to mean soul or spirit, might simply signify wind or breath, the outward and visible sign of life. Now, yeah, we could say etymologically that's where some of these things come from. As people say, oh, it doesn't really mean this, but demon doesn't mean the same as daemon, and other sorts of examples like that. People need to stop it with their etymology and saying, well, if it kind of stems from things that have this, then its context, then its lexicographical and semantic meaning must always be the same in every language that it's, no, it's not. The literal, the lexicographic, the mystic meaning, this sort of stuff can change. Their latter schools are even more explicit. For that which befalls man befalls beast. As the one dies, so does the other. They all have one death, all go unto one place. Ecclesiastes 3:19. But the modern soul, a nothing, a string of negations, a negative in chief, is thus described in the Mahabharat. It is indivisible, inconceivable, inconceptible. It is eternal, universal, permanent, immovable. It is indivisible and unalterable. Hence the modern spiritualism, which, rejecting materialism, can only use material language. These, say the Hâjî, are mere sounds. He would not assert verba gignunt verba, but verba gignunt res, a step further. The ideas Bacon's, idola fori, omnium molestissima, the twofold illusions of language, either the names of things that have no existence in fact, or the names of things whose idea is confused and ill-defined. He derives the soul idea from the savage ghost, which Dr. Johnson defined to be a kind of shadowy being. He justly remarks that it arose perhaps in Egypt and was not invented by the people of the book, but this term the Muslimin denote Jews and Christians who have a recognized revelation, while their ignorance refuses it to Gubrists, Hindus, and Confucians. Well, the ancient Egyptians and some other groups like that, they did have, there was spiritual visions and stuff that people even had text come out of that. So it's not really appropriate to say that and Islamically, the idea is completely denied that there was a people without guidance. Now, there is reference that the Hyperboreans, the people north of Persia and north of Afghanistan, is the, these people, the Turks, the Slavs, the Mongolians, that these people didn't have their own prophet. from God. But it again does not, Islam doesn't teach that they didn't have the message from a prophet. Zarathustra, for example, would have been known to all those people. And, you know, before Christianity, and, well, maybe not all those people, but, you know, influence spread, right, of various dispensations, but not of the Christian Protestant way of thinking. He evidently holds to the doctrine of progress. With him, protoplasm is the iliastron, the prima materies. Our word matter is derived from the Sanskrit matra, which, however, signifies properly the invisible type of visible matter. In modern language, the substance distinct from the sum of its physical and chemical properties. Thus, the matra exists only in thought and is not recognizable by the actions of the five senses. His chain of being reminds us of Professor Huxley's pedigree of the horse, Autohippus, Mesohippus, Myohippus, Protohippus, Pliohippus, and Acuus. He has evidently heard of modern biology or Hylozoism, which holds its 250,000 species of living beings, animal and vegetable, to be progressive modifications of one great fundamental unity, and unity of so-called mental faculties as well as bodily structure. And some of this you can find in Hinduism, some of this you can find explicitly in the fundamental text of Islam. God is the evolver in the Quran, and there's further detail of that attribute that would indicate some of these things without modern theory would change over time with its, you know. But this world of ideas, the imaginal, how you phrase that in Arabic or Farsi or something? The matha, no, I don't really know how that would be phrased. If this was really a translation of KASÍDAH, then why is me telling us the word? Because that's an interesting and important word to look at. What's the, is it Aristotelian idea, the elementary ideas or something like that? And this is the jelly speck. He scoffs at the popular idea that man is the great central figure around which all things gyrate like marionettes. In fact, the anthropocentric idea of Draper, which, strange to say, lives by the side of the telescope and the microscope, as man is of recent origin and may end at an early epoch of the macrocosm. So before his birth, all things revolved around nothing and may continue to do so after his death? Well, sense that makes. The HÂJÍ, who elsewhere denounces compound ignorance, holds that all evil comes from an error, and that all knowledge has been developed by overthrowing error, the ordinary channel of human thought. He ends this section with a great truth. There are things which human reason or instinct matured in its undeveloped state cannot master, but reason is a law to itself. Therefore, we are not bound to believe or to attempt belief in anything which is contrary or contradictory to reason. But let's be careful to say, what do the claims to revelation and such themselves actually say, and what is interpretation? Here he is diametrically opposed to Rome, who says, do not appeal to history, that is private judgment. Do not appeal to Holy Writ, that is heresy. Do not appeal to reason, that is rationalism. He holds with the patriarchs of the Hebrew Holy Writ that the present life is all sufficient for an intellectual, not a sentimental being, and therefore there is no want of a heaven or hell. With far more contradiction, the Western poet sings, hell hath no limits, nor is circumscribed in one's self place, but when we are in hell, and where hell is, there must we ever be. And to be short, when all this world dissolves, and every creature shall be purified, all places shall be hell, which are not heaven. For what want is there of a hell when all are pure? He enlarges upon the ancient Buddhist theory that happiness and misery are equally distributed among men and beasts. Some enjoy much and suffer much, others the reverse. Hence, Diderot declares, sober passions produce only the commonplace. The man of modern passion lives and dies like a brute. And again, we have the half-truth, that the mark of rank in nature is capacity for pain. The latter implies an equal capacity for pleasure, and thus the balance is kept. Hâjî ABDû then proceeds to show that faith is an accident to birth. One of his omitted distichs says, race makes religion true, but upon the maker acts the made. A finite God and infinite sin, in lieu of raising man degrade. In a manner of dialogue, he introduces the various races, each fighting to establish its own belief. The frank Christian abuses the Hindu, who retorts that he is of lencha, mixed or impure blood, a term attributed to all non-Hindus. The same is done by Nazarene and Muslim, by the Confucian, who believes in nothing. Well, don't think that's fair to say it that way. And by the Sufi, who naturally has the last word. The association of the Virgin Mary and Saint Joseph with the Trinity in the Roman and Greek churches makes many Muslims conclude that the Christians believe not in 3, but in 5 persons. So an Englishman writes of the early fathers, they only said that 3 equals 1, that 1 equals 3. They profess to explain how that curious arithmetical combination had been brought about. The indivisible had been divided and yet was not divided. It was divisible and yet was indivisible. Black was white and white was black, and yet there were not 2 colors, but 1 color. And whoever did not believe it would be damned. An Arab quotation runs in the original, Ahsanu la makani il-bata il-jahannamu. The best of places for the generous youth is hellfire. Gehenna, alias Jahim, being the fiery place of eternal punishment. And the second saying, Al-Nar Wallah Ar, fire of hell rather than shame, is equally condemned by the Quranist. The Gustaki insolence of fate is the expression of Mar et Qiyam, stanza 30. What, without asking, hither hurried whence, and without asking, whither hurried hence. Oh, many a cup of this forbidden wine must drown the memory of that insolence. Sophistically, the word means the coquetry of the beloved one, the divina particula aura. And the section ends with Pope's, he can't be wrong whose life is in the right. And let us remember with some of that, some things can be said more to make a point rather than being, what they literally said. So if this is the offensive, if this is the thing that's, well, in one sense, okay, if the Christian worships the angels, and so Mary and Joseph are at the top of this, some people would worship the saint, a pair of saints, the male and female saints represented there, and then you have the Trinity, which is not this, you can think of Abraxas, Barbelo, Abramento, without, as names of God, without having to divide it into personages and, do the Christian thing with it. Although most people are going to do that. Yaldabaoth is thought to be like in this 12 thing. And you will, if you look deep enough, you will. There is reference to, just like the Christian thing, the 12 with 1, 1 and 12, or something like that. That's sort of one of the ways that Yaldabaoth would have been thought about. But that's the pseudo divinity claim, you know, setting itself on the wheel and claiming to be the real creator.